Hello and welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Matt Dumont, an LSAT teacher and tutor at the LSAT Demon and a 2L at the University of Maryland. With me today is special guest Tanzi Vicino, a 2L evening student who started as a full-time day student at Maryland and then transitioned into the part-time program, mainly because she's an actual freaking doctor currently practicing as an OBGYN at Mercy Hospital here in Maryland. How you doing, Tanzi?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you for asking. A little tired, but that's just the life of a law student, right?
I think it's the life of a law student who's also a doctor. Like, you're sitting in your office right now wearing your scrubs.
Yeah.
Did you just complete, like, your shift for the week?
I did. Every Thursday, I am on call for 24 hours. So I start off in the office seeing patients, and then it's a little crazy. So I will see patients in the office. I have someone covering me on labor and delivery while I go to class. And so I go to class from 6:30 to 8:30. And then I'm back in the hospital when class is over until 9 o'clock the next morning, Friday mornings.
So just to be clear, you start your shift, you have someone cover for labor and deliveries during your shift while you go to class, and then you come back and continue your shift till the next morning.
Correct.
So
yeah.
I remember.
I like pain.
You like pain. I remember the first time. So Tanzi and I met through the school. We had like this sort of reading group thing in our first semester because we were on Zoom, and the school was like, "Let's do camaraderie," and like we were in that with Professor Pappas together, which was super fun.
Super fun.
The thing I remember most about like meeting you for real for the first time was when you decided that you were going to come get a pie from my wife, who was pandemic baking.
My husband loved that pie.
Yeah, I think it was
chocolate
pecan, right?
Pie.
Yeah.
A chocolate pecan pie.
Chocolate
we
pecan.
have to make sure we get it right. Yes, my husband loved that pie and still ask about it. And I was like, I promise I'm going to reach out to Matt and see if his wife can make us another one. Yeah.
Okay. So I remember that instance because you were like, "Hey, I'll come over after my shift at 10 in the morning," and that's when I put together that you were full-time as a day student at Maryland, taking a full load while doing like delivery and birth stuff at a hospital as a practicing doctor, and my brain exploded because like I just don't understand how you do that. So can you sort of speak a little bit about your law journey? Like, what made you want to go to law school? Why did you choose the day program and then transition out of it to the evening program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot.
Sure.
So my law school journey actually has been years in the making. So right around 2008, I became interested in public health, healthcare policy. I was just starting out working, and I was working in a community health center here in Baltimore. And you really start to see the healthcare disparities that start in the legislature. And at that point, I was like, yeah, not only do I want to be on the end actually providing the healthcare to these patients, but I want to have some input in the policy that goes behind these laws that are just arbitrarily created. Because most of the time, the people that are making them have absolutely no healthcare background. And it shows. And so I applied to another law school in the area, and I got in, but I was not ready to give up my social life. And so I deferred, and then I had my son and deferred again, and had my second son and deferred again. And then finally, when I had 2 kids under 2, I said, you know what, I'm going to start law school. And
yes. Let's pile on. So doctor, mother of 2 toddlers, I think at that point.
Yeah.
Let's throw law school on top of that.
Like, more on top.
It'll be fine.
Yeah. And so I applied to a couple different schools, and I really thought that I could just handle the load of a full-time law school program just to get it done.
Sure. 3 years as opposed to 4, which is like a typical difference between the part-time versus full-time program. And so the part-time program they take like what, one less class a semester or so. So it's like a whole lot less of a load, right?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah. So that really was a difference because yes, the part-time program is 4 years. And there's a couple less requirements that I said, you know, it might be a little bit more realistic. And so after starting, I quickly realized that I could not handle the 5 classes of the full-time program and be able to work safely and be functional for my kids.
Yeah,
and
be a functional family member for you and your husband, and also your 2 children who are still pretty dependent.
They're very dependent.
They're not
right
working
now they
yet.
are 3 and 4, right? Right. So,
amazing.
It was crazy.
Well, I would love to hear a little bit more about that part-time, full-time sort of distinction from your perspective, and because we got a piece of listener mail here, which I'm going to read. And when we got it and it got sent to me, I was like, there's a perfect person for this. And her name is Tanzi. And I really hope that she was able to do it. And you were. And I'm so thrilled that you're here and really appreciative. And I hope that the listeners gain just an awesome amount of benefit from your anecdotal story. And so the listener mail we have is right here. It says, Jay is the person who wrote this in, and he writes, what do you think about working part-time during law school? Perhaps a work study where one can complete homework on the job. How likely is this? How do students finance groceries, transportation, and other basic needs? And so I think you're doing a little bit more than part-time, but like, I think there's some conceptions that happen about the idea of like what is work while being in law school, and a lot of people who are thinking that kind of thing are geared towards part-time programs of like, I'm going to keep my full-time job and then go to law school in the evening, and so so that I can afford to live because I need to support myself, I need to support my family. So I think that those are kind of like these broader questions, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the difference between the full-time to part-time program, juggling with your work with a very real job. It's not just grocery money that we're talking about here, but also like, how do you do that balance? How do you find that balance between work and school, even in the part-time program, which is, from my experience or my knowledge, not so part-time?
It's definitely not so part-time. So that was a really good email. So I guess I would start with the biggest difference between the day and the night. Obviously, when you are a full-time day student, the law school, at least at Maryland, they frown upon you working. And it's because they frown upon you working, it's really hard to go to professors and say like, hey, I really can't get this done because I just work 24 hours. And they're like, you're not supposed to be working at all, let alone 24 hours. So it's almost like, figure it out, right? Because you're doing something you're not supposed to do. So obviously, if you have to work because you have those commitments, then the daytime program is just not a good fit. Can you do it? You can, but you're not going to get as much leeway with your other outside obligations of law school because they don't want you working your first year.
Interesting. So just to sort of like broaden the scope in that, the ABA actually used to require no work. Like it was a requirement that you had to sign on the dotted line for day students full-time. They're like, you can't work during your first year. They actually have dropped that requirement, but a lot of schools still have that, where it's like permission-based in order to work while you're a full-time student. And some schools still completely prohibit it. Some schools are like, we don't care. So just to sort of like expand the scope of that, that's a pretty typical reaction of like, what are you doing working? You're supposed to be studying. Get back to the books. So please continue, Miss Tanzi.
Yeah. And so that was obviously a really big thing because I do have to work. I have a family to support, and not having my income would be pretty devastating to my family. So that was another reason why I said, you know what, the part-time program is just going to be an overall better fit. Switching to the part-time program, and like you mentioned, I always want to caveat that while it is technically termed part-time, you are literally only taking one less class. Yep. And your professor, we have the same syllabus for the day students as the evening students, but it's a lot more difficult to get that amount of assigned reading done after your class, because not only do you have work, you have class immediately after work, and then once you get home, you really have between like 9:30 and 1 a.m. to get everything done for your classes that are coming up. So there is that. And in addition to all that, a really big distinction that I discovered was the financial aid aspect once you are a part-time student.
Okay. So let's talk about that a bit. What is the difference? And of course, please be as private as you would like to be. I don't expect you to talk about your financial situation in depth on air.
Yeah.
But if there was a difference that the school sort of dictated to you, that would be valid information for people who are thinking about this kind of transition. They might be like, well, let's try out full-time day. Let's see what happens. But I'm really working. So, and then I'll talk a little bit about some things that I know on a broader scheme. So please, what was the difference? How did the school treat you differently after you transitioned from full-time to part-time?
Yeah. So obviously, at least from what I've gathered, the school, while they really claim to have a really good part-time program, which I actually do think is a good part-time program, they really focus on the day students. So most of their financial aid really goes to the day students. Often, I'm assuming, operating under the presumption that most day students are not going to be working. And so they have more of that need-based. And for part-time students, they assume we are working, so we can supplement that. So while you may very well have the grades, I graduated all of my degrees with 3.8s. I scored very well on my LSAT, and I had a really nice scholarship offer to go full time. But once I went part time, I got nothing at all.
Wow.
Nothing.
Okay.
And I had to pay completely out of pocket.
So just to be really, really clear for the listeners, part of your transition, which willingly you made because of sanity reasons, like to keep sane and alive and safe in the world, you transitioned from the full-time to part-time, and the school's response to that was to be like, okay, well, you're working, so no financial aid.
Yeah, because now it's based on like my income, not necessarily just like my academic performance. And they assumed, I'm assuming, because no one can deny or confirm this when I ask questions, that I'm going to be making the same money that I made when I fill out that FAFSA. Which is not true, because I did cut down on some of my office hours just because I literally just couldn't do it anymore. Right. Yeah.
Wow. So to broaden that scope a little bit towards some sort of things that I know nationally, there are some differences. Some schools do offer financial aid to part-time programs, and you can check that out on their 509 reports. The ABA 509 reports are required disclosures for consumer protection that you can find at the LSAT Demon scholarship calculator, which is lsatdemon.com/scholarships. And we have 509 reports for every single school. They were just recently updated for the last incoming class in 2021. And so it has the information for scholarships, not only for full-time students and that kind of financial aid, but also for part-time programs if the school offers one. So if you're considering part-time, check those out so you can be better informed about whether your school even offers this kind of stuff and what kind of offers they do. Do they offer full scholarships for part-time? Maybe, maybe not. So my information that I have from the part-time programs out there is similar to Tanzi's, is that they tend to put the financial aid egg in the day student basket. And whether that's fair or unfair from a broader scheme is a conversation that I'm not sure we should have right here. I would argue that it's pretty unfair. These are the same students, the same kind of prestige that are potentially coming out, and I think that they're taking advantage of the idea that you can support yourself because you're working while in law school. And I'm like, wouldn't it be nice to not worry about that anyway?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you know about any other differences? So other than the financial aid aspect that was different for you transitioning, what are the other differences? Because you spoke about some, like, for instance, some requirements that might have gone away that might make your law school journey a little bit easier. So I'd love to hear about that as well.
Yeah. So academically, when you're in the part-time program, you don't have to do the experiential internship clerkship obligation. We don't have that.
Okay. Are you talking about the clinic?
The clinic.
The Cardin requirement? Okay. So I'll expand on that. So at Maryland, we have the Cardin requirement, which it's like a required clinic semester where we are practicing attorneys under the Maryland laws, having real clients and doing that kind of stuff. That's a requirement for all the day students that apparently the evening students don't have.
It's not.
Okay.
Nope, it is not a requirement for us to have. We still have to do the cert paper. We obviously still have to have the required hours for graduation. That's just the one thing that we don't have to do, because obviously they know that we're working full time, and to be able to do that, that's typically like a 9 to 5 day thing.
Right.
And most people don't have that opportunity to do that for an entire semester or even a summer. So we don't have that. But one of the things that I do find that was very helpful was the professors are a lot more laid back with evening students. They're not as stringent with some deadlines if we come to them and say, like, hey, can I get a little extension on this brief or this memo? Because of work requirements, I just really haven't had the time to read these 30 cases thoroughly, and I just want to really make sure that I put my best foot forward. And typically I found all of the professors that I've had in the last year and a half have been really agreeable and understanding to that, whereas awesome. I did not see that.
With the day students and like all the 20-something-year-olds, the professors are like, hey, if you're late, your grade's dropping. And it seems like the evening professors are a little bit like, we understand you're working full-time.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
also... Yeah,
that seems like a nice consideration, at least.
Yeah, it was. And then another thing, as far as the student body, obviously everyone's a little bit older, and when I say older, just not straight out of undergrad. Most of them have had some type of work experience, and so are coming into law school, usually doing a second career change, which changes the atmosphere a lot in the classroom, to where it's very, for the most part, a very relaxed atmosphere amongst classmates. There may be some competitiveness, but we don't really see it.
That's nice. And I actually have found that in the day program as well, at least as far as the competitiveness. I feel like our class, the 2L class, is very collegial at the University of Maryland. I can't speak for the classes above and below, but I feel like we were always very friendly and like helpful to each other. Like, oh my gosh, you weren't in class, here's the notes. We were, at least in my experience, very friendly in that respect, which was nice and not present at all law schools. There are some law schools
definitely
out there
not. No, it's definitely not. Yeah, I have a friend that's at Georgetown right now, and it's a lot different.
Yeah, and right down the street too. 45 minutes by train away. Okay, so just to sort of like wrap up on this email, they said, what's it like working part-time? So when I asked about, when I wasn't sure you were available to do this, I asked in the SBA, the Student Bar Association chat, and I just want to share some of the reactions that people gave of like the idea of what it is to be a part-time student while working. And here were some of the responses that they gave me permission to share. One was, if you want them to feel the real experience, just play 15 minutes of screaming, which I thought was hilarious. The next one was, imagine you're drowning and then someone hands you a tort book. You now have the evening student visual. And so I just thought that was funny. I feel like the difference between day and evening course loads is not significantly different, but the work aspect of being a human is just so much more on top. And so if you're thinking about going that route, it's definitely a viable option to help keep people from taking out, for instance, cost of living loans and those kind of things. If you have a good job and you want to keep it, like, that's totally an opportunity here. But just be aware of what you're getting into. Law school is no joke in the idea of the workload. I easily read 1,500 to 2,000 pages of case law a semester. It is a full-time job of reading on top of going to class, on top of whatever you're doing in your life. So just be aware of what you're potentially signing up for. And so this idea of the part-time balance with work, be careful. Maybe think about it before you sign up to go to law school, right?
Yeah, I would say that I want to just make note that it's definitely not an easier route, because law school is not easy no matter which program you enter. And honestly, if I could do things differently, I probably would prefer, if I had the opportunity, to just go to law school and not have to work, because it's so hard to maintain that balance of obviously being productive at work, performing at work, and performing for your law school professors that loves to cold call every single class, which means you have to read 200 pages of tort law.
You have to be ready to say, hey, this is what that case was about, and have an articulate conversation about it. Yeah, I think that's an awesome bullet point to sort of like wrap up on. And one of the reasons why we encourage people to try, like the goal here is to not have to pay for the tuition because of that exact kind of consideration. It's much better. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easier if you can go to law school without having the added consideration of work. And how do you do that? Try to get that full tuition scholarship, or as close to it as possible, so that your financial future isn't impacted in the way that it could be with a $200,000 chunk of change of debt. Whew. Okay. Well, I want to say awesome. Thanks so much for Jay for writing in. If you'd like to be,
Jay.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I also want to say thank you so much, Tanzi. Thank you very much for being a guest on today. You are like the expert at University of Maryland, I think, of the full-time to part-time transition, and so I thought it was just invaluable to get your perspective on this. If you'd like to be on the show, send us an email to help@lsatdemon.com. We'd love to hear your LSAT or law school admissions questions. Thank you so much for listening, and don't pay for law school.